before we start, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's registered and everyone that's joining us today. As Matt said, I'm Hannah from accessplanit, and this is our 4th year running Everest, and it's just great to see how many people have come along. So today we are joined by Jonathan from Breathe, and we're going to be having a conversation about company culture, which is more important than ever, which I'm sure you agree, Jonathan. We've got a few things going on in the mix. I guess the struggles of remote working and maintaining that culture. We have what they're calling the Great Resignation and the struggle to rehire again, and also the importance of culture, as we've mentioned on the last talk, and how that then feeds through to the customer's experience as well. So I think now is just such a great time to have a conversation about culture, the impact, and how we can kind of build on that as businesses.
Yeah, totally. Couldn't agree more. I'm sometimes asked, when's the good time to start working on your business's culture? Now. Yeah. It's always now. There's never a better time than starting now.
Exactly. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights. Obviously, you run Breathe, which is designed with people in mind and promoting culture. You've also recently launched the 2021 Culture Economy Report. So I'm sure you've got some really interesting findings from there. Yeah. And also the Culture Leaders List, which we were lucky enough to get a place on. But I saw that there was over hundreds of applications. So I'm sure you've got a wealth of insight that you can share with the audience today. I'm really looking forward to getting into that.
Absolutely. And by the way, getting onto any kind of culture leaders list is not luck. It's deliberate. Culture is deliberate, and that's the way to go about it. But yeah, we'll definitely get into that.
Perfect. So can you just tell us a little bit about what the culture report that you put together is all about, where you get that research from? Just give us a bit of context.
Yeah, so this is the 4th year that we've done the Culture Economy Report. And what we set out to do initially was to investigate and try and prove the case that culture is essential for the economic well-being of a business, and particularly small business, because that's where we love playing. And the initial reports that we set out those 4 years ago really highlighted the fact that businesses that were deliberate about the way they set up their company culture and nurtured their company culture were ones that were really thriving. But not only were they thriving, they were great places to work. So it was a win-win all round. And then since then, what we've done is we've taken different areas of culture or different parts about the economy that we're in. So the 21 report, well, it was in the age of pandemic, and it was really looking at organizations as to how they were adjusting, or were they adjusting during the pandemic. Some fantastic, some really positive results and some pretty sort of challenging results. But very much it's to highlight to us as business owners how important culture is, and to start to feed into the mix some of the best examples that we've seen out there. We take out fresh research each time. We do quantitative, we do qualitative, and we just try and build that picture up. And then we back that up with the culture leaders list that you mentioned, which is us saying, here are these fantastic organizations that we believe are doing a job that needs a light shining on it. And as you said yourself, you were well deserved to appear on that list.
Thank you. So just a few stats that I pulled from the most recent report, which I thought were quite shocking. Yeah. So toxic workplace culture is costing the UK economy £20 billion a year. It's wild.
Yeah, phenomenal numbers. And there's there's this idea of lies, damn lies, and statistics. We can make the numbers say whatever we want, but we always go through these numbers with a really fine tooth comb. And toxic's a difficult word. What is a toxic culture? And to everybody, toxic is different. But when you start to look at employees that are leaving, or that productivity is going down, or communication isn't happening, those numbers really ramp up. Now, you can say we lose an employee because they're not happy. Well, we have to recruit them again. But then also, not only are we having to pay the cost of recruiting, we're paying the cost of building them up to speed. So yeah, those numbers are huge. And there's there's often some very quick wins that an organization can have. You can't turn a culture around overnight, but I think by just highlighting some of the things that can be done, we're just trying to help businesses make a difference.
It's really interesting to get into those quick wins a little bit later as well.
Yeah.
Another one that I picked up was 1/3 of employees quit due to company culture fit. So I guess that leads us to the elusive question of what is culture? Is there a one-size-fits-all definition?
Yeah, and I guess there's lots of different definitions. There's lots of textbooks trying to answer that. I tend to go right back to something really basic, and it's just how we do stuff around here. It's what makes an organization tick. I also like to think of it as being how we do stuff around here when the bosses aren't around. Mm-hmm. It's just what goes on, what's the bedrock of the organization. And we can get into things like values and vision and mission and all that kind of good stuff, but fundamentally it's what makes the organization tick.
Definitely. So going back to textbooks, Peter Drucker, I'm sure you know what's coming, said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What are your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, right. So I'm going to open it with, who am I to question the great Peter Drucker? Then I'm going to question him. Culture without strategy is just a party. It's a great place to work, but without the strategy, you don't know where you're going. So I think the two are joined at the hip. Mm-hmm. You can't have one without the other, or one won't succeed as well as it could without the other. You've got to lead with the culture. The culture is the bit that provides sort of the momentum. The strategy provides the direction. And I don't think you can have a great culture in an organization without a well thought through strategy. So joined at the hip.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Love that. So how does a leadership team create a culture, and how important are they in building that culture? What can they be doing?
Yeah, I mean, the leadership are central to it. They are not the culture, but they build or demolish the culture. I once had somebody suggest to me that as a company is growing, the first 20 employees are the ones that set the culture. Mm-hmm. And then it's increasingly difficult after that to change it. So the leadership team, I think, have got to tread a difficult balance between two opposites, between communicating and listening. So first off, we always hear communicate, you can't communicate enough. And that's true. I totally agree with that. But then on the flip side of that, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. So I think what the leadership team have got to do is they've got to listen to what the organization is feeling and then communicate into that, and then pause and listen and then communicate in. So things like company values, what makes the company tick, you have to keep communicating that in. And as you add new employees or employees change or situations change, you have to keep communicating or living those values. But if you don't stop and listen, then you won't ever get that pulse back. So I think now if you very deliberately, in a lot of leaders like talking and not always listening, but actually I think the communication comes first, but you have to be very deliberate in what you communicate. Mm-hmm. Get the message out there, listen to what's coming back, get the message out there, listen to what's coming back. So it's an obvious one, but it's communicate. And there's a bunch of different ways and different things that you can communicate, but that's really the starting point.
Yeah. Okay. So just going back to the values, if there was a company looking to redefine or starting from defining those values, what advice would you give them?
The starting point for that, I think, is the size of the company. So going back to that small business, if you've got 3, 4, 5, maybe even up to 10 employees, I think the values are the values of the leaders, usually the founders, the owners. And I think it's important there for the leaders to set the direction. So a little bit controversial, maybe at around 10 employees, it's a bit difficult. But the leaders have got to almost impose those values on the organization, because they're the ones that have to live the values. If they don't live it, then the values don't happen. As the organization gets bigger, then you have to involve the team more and more. So to take us as an organization, when we first started, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us, the values were what we believed we wanted the organization to be, how the organization would behave. The last time we revisited those values, and we've revised them, refined them maybe 3, 4 times. The last time we did that, we had a bunch of guys in from the company. So a bunch of people from around the organization, and we looked at our existing value set. We got a good understanding as to how the organization was thinking now we were bigger, and revised them that way. I don't think, maybe in a very big organization, then you have to involve an awful lot more people. But I don't think you can do values by committee or by consensus. I think the organization has got the values. I tend to say every organization has got its values and its culture, even if it doesn't know it. If it's not been deliberate about it, the culture will be there, the values will be there, but nobody will know about it. Nobody will know whether to nurture it or not. So I think it's taking that pulse in a smaller organization, but it's down to the leaders. In a slightly bigger organization, start to involve more and more people, because it's got to be believed, it's got to be understood across the business.
So we've got a few ways here how we kind of bring and keep our values alive, and that's a huge part of who we are as a business. We hire by them, fire by them, reward, recognise. Do you have any actionable takeaways or insights on how businesses can do that?
Yeah, I think so. And again, it sort of comes down to the size of the organisation. The smaller the organisation, they just have to happen. People have to see them. It's sort of values by osmosis, maybe. It's just got to be there. Everybody's got to feel it. As the organisation gets bigger and more disparate, then I think you need to have some artifacts, some reminders. So too many people lead with, oh, we need the values on coffee cups, or we need the values on posters and stuff like that. And that's okay. But it is true, as an organization gets bigger, you need to trip over the values to be reminded, or some people do. So number one is just live them, and don't be afraid as a leader to question in a meeting, or to question yourself. When somebody comes to you for a decision or to talk something through, I would always rather start with the values. We have a value. Our number one value is people first. So if you look after your people, they'll look after the rest. And when you have a value of people first, you then have to think, do we always put people first? So in the meeting agendas, if we have a whole company meeting, is the people bit at the beginning? Because if it's not, then we're clearly not demonstrating our values. Sort of a long-winded answer there, but I think at the beginning, it's just got to be living it and questioning it and always bringing it into the conversation. As the organization gets bigger, you need some artifacts to help make it happen, but they're not a replacement for actually living it.
So live and breathe first, coffee mat second.
There you go. Yeah. And don't knock the coffees. They're coffee mugs and everything. There's a place for them, but don't lead with them.
Perfect. So what kind of things are you seeing changing during the pandemic, during COVID, during the times where we're not all together the same? What kind of things are you seeing companies do to keep the culture alive?
We had some fantastic examples during the culture leaders list, and they're many and varied. Some bigger organisations had more money to spend. Others were really grassroots. But there's, I think the number one thing is to get people together in whatever way you can. Yeah, towards the end, we were all suffering from Zoom fatigue, but actually get everybody together for a different reason, or with a slightly different mindset. You can get that conversation going again. I think it's really interesting with the dynamic of online meetings, of Zoom meetings or Teams meetings. I think there's very different ways that you can do that. We saw lots of companies who were trialing different things. The the quizzes, the getting together for virtual lunches, I think the organizations that were really being very deliberate about protecting their culture were the ones that weren't afraid to try things. They had that experimental mindset that we're going to make this work. I don't know how it's going to work, but we're going to make that work. And I also think very early on in the pandemic, a lot of organizations that were very deliberate about culture actually said to their teams, we don't know how this is going to work, but we're going to try damn hard to make it work. We don't have all the answers, but we're going to work together to make it happen, to find a way through. And that's probably the number one tip I would say, is that it is so much about honesty. Being truthful, not being frightening, but actually being honest and true with people to say, what do you think? How do you see this working? What can we do to make this happen?
Exactly. And now that we know more, how do you see that working in practice and cultures changing?
We're entering the wonderful, wacky world of hybrid working, whatever that is. And for me, that's so much more than office or home. It's actually being able to try and fit the way of working, the new way of working, into how the organization thinks and ticks, mixing that with how the individual employees work and how best they can perform during it. So, I would encourage, if anybody hasn't got their hybrid working worked out, forget about the name of hybrid working, get conversations going with people, try and understand how people have felt. We've had people who have thrived working at home. We've had people who have hated every minute of it. We've had people who thought they loved it, but actually the moment they got back into the office, they realized just how much they missed the office. So there's no one shape fits all. There's no Harvard Business Review article that's going to solve the hybrid working. It's just get out there and get those conversations going again. And I would say for most organizations, get back together. We had our summer party about 10 days ago.
Oh, nice.
And it was just fantastic to see everybody again. And we did it outside, and it was all, obviously clearly it met all the rules, but it was all really COVID safe. But it was just fantastic to get everybody back together again.
Definitely. How often would you advise? Obviously, that's a summer party. And I guess it depends on the organisation. What kind of pulse would you say that you're seeing at the moment of times that people come together as a business?
You're right in that it depends on the organisation. It depends on that culture again. No, I think we've got a lot of catching up to do. I truly believe that if you went into the pandemic, into lockdown with a really tip-top culture, that culture's been eroded. So it's no matter how much you do to try and top it up, something about that culture has been eroded over the sort of the 15, 18 months. So I would say start getting your people back together, start getting the teams back together, get that conversation going again. It's not going to pick up where it was, because even in the best of times, you're not the same a year and a half later than you were a year and a half ago. So get those conversations going again. And I would say get them going in a different way, meet in different ways, get together in different groups, different structures, different environments. Try and get people settled back into the idea of what's it like to be with a bunch of people again. Because for some, it's scary.
Yeah. Definitely.
And why wouldn't it be? We all have our comfort zones, and if we don't step outside of our comfort zones, then our comfort zones get smaller. And in lockdown, so many people's comfort zones have centered around staying in, of not getting new experiences. And it's only when you get out into your stretch zone. There's a business coach I work with called Ian Windle, talks a lot about you need to get inside your stretch zone, because that's where growth happens. That's where you begin to live.
I guess that touches on well-being a little bit. How much of a factor is well-being in culture, and how have you seen people supporting the well-being of their teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's going to be the topic of the coming years. I think there's a lot of work that we as organizations need to do around well-being. You know, we can't solve everybody's problems, and we shouldn't try, but we have to recognize that if we want people to come to work being themselves, then we have to recognize that there's a well-being issue to work with there. Something else that came out in the culture economy report was just how few organizations had well-being in place. And I think that's essential, and that's got to come from the leaders again. So it's important to build some form of well-being program in. You know, it doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to be expensive. It can start off with, I'm a great believer in the one-to-one. Mm-hmm. Everybody, I think, in an organization should have a one-to-one with somebody that they report to. And that one-to-one, part of it is for the leader or the manager to get a good feeling for how that person is at that moment in time, because well-being changes. You can have somebody who's seemingly perfectly well and, you know, on top of the world one moment, but then the next day something has tipped their stress level up that little extra bit, and it really is a case of trying to spot that.
Definitely. And how do you think learning and development feeds into culture?
I think for me, you know, we talk a lot around here about having a growth mindset, and I think it's a really healthy place to be, is to have that growth mindset, to be constantly learning and developing your skills. I think in a small organization, it's very tempting to say we just don't have time for that. You know, I think it's a little bit, it's L&D is a bit like HR. It's one of those big company terms, but actually when you come down to it, yeah, L&D is all about learning and development, is all about just helping your people grow, or better still, helping them grow themselves. So, you know, I see it as being essential. Not everybody can do it at every moment of, you know, the day of their lives, but I think it's essential that everybody has a chance to grow. Whatever direction that is sort of almost entirely up to them. But yeah, I think it's just a core part of who we are as humans. Definitely.
One of our core values here is learn and improve. And that's not just about formal learning or reading a book. It's about being curious, asking why, and how we can be better, constantly thinking. It's that whole growth mindset again.
Yeah. And I had a question on a podcast last week, which was, you know, why do you keep talking about growth? Growth isn't always good. And I think it's very true. I think growth for growth's sake can be sometimes unhealthy, but actually there's something about us as human beings that when we're in the right frame of mind, when we've got enough space to start thinking and growing and, you know, moving ourselves forward, then, I mean, maybe if you think about growth as being just actually progressing forward rather than feeling like we're stuck and stationary, then I think it's an essential part of who we are.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. And I think growth can be subjective. So we say here, we would rather be great than giant. So it's about growing in the right ways.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way of putting it. And you know, flip side of any of that is I think that as a world economy, we're constantly striving for growth, and I think that's causing us an awful lot of trouble. But you know, that's just a growth in stuff, in material things, which we're finding out now isn't very healthy. But growth as people, I think it's just part of who we are.
Definitely. So just touching on, I guess there's a lot of recruitment issues in all kinds of industries. How would you advise using the culture as a selling point and a differentiator when hiring?
I think the number of different stages of hiring. First off, I see hiring as being a sales and marketing exercise now. You know, it's we need to be putting ourselves forward. We need to be doing it in advance of actually when we need people. So we need to be talking about the way we operate as an organization. You Again, I would say this, but things like the Culture Leaders List or any of the culture awards, I think are really useful ways of A, testing your culture, but B, once you've tested it, of actually shouting about it. So I would say try get ahead of the game, get your culture flowing, get it working, and then get some recognition for it. When it comes to actually putting the message out there, the job description, the job adverts, that's the place where you put your culture. Don't write a very flat job description if you're an organization that's bright and bubbly. Equally, if you're a fairly flat and conservative organization, don't try and write a bubbly and breezy job description. The way you put yourself out has got to reflect your culture. And then when it comes into maybe the most important part, when you get people to come in to see you, share who you are, share how you feel. The online interviewing, we've all found it can work, but actually get that person into the organization now if you can. Get them to meet different people. Get them to have a feel for how you are as an organization, because not every culture is going to be right for every person. So it's very much a two-way street. Now we've got to move fast often with hiring, because people are moving fast. Yes. Jobs are being filled very quickly. So we've got to move fast, but I would urge people to not throw caution to the wind and move too fast. Better to have the right person than to try and correct the mistake further down the line. So start to project your culture into everything you do around the recruitment process. That's certainly where we see organizations who are doing some great work.
So in line with that, are you seeing marketing teams and HR talent teams working a lot more collaboratively? Is that a trend?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I hadn't really thought about it like that. I'm seeing a lot of HR teams who are thinking much more around how to market the role, how to sell the role. I think it would be some really interesting work to give the job description to the content person, or to get marketing involved more. It's an interesting angle. I don't know why I hadn't really thought about it like that, but yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So this might be a difficult one. If you could narrow it down to one single piece of advice to anyone creating a great company culture, what would that one piece of advice be?
I'm going to try and get beyond the single word of communicate. I would say sit down and have meaningful conversations with people in your organization. If you're 20 people, sit down with all 20, and don't assume that everybody knows everything. Back to sales and marketing again, whatever it is, it used to be 7 times you had to say a sales message before somebody got it. I think it's now probably more like 10 or 15. It's exactly the same with your people, is to sit down with them and keep sharing what's going on and how you're feeling, and build the picture of the organization that they're part of, because sooner or later they will believe they're part of it and start sharing it. Was also fascinated. I was listening to the talk just before this one on customer experience. I was fascinated that one of the number one things that was raised there was deliver on your promises. Well, that's got to be number one when it comes to your team as well. Don't overpromise, and if you don't know what's happening, then tell them and try and work it out. But when you say you're going to do something, for goodness sake, do it, or explain why you haven't done it.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't know if you agree, but I think more and more customers and employees are becoming interchangeable. We need to serve them in exactly the same way.
Yeah. And of course, that's the massive argument for getting diversity in your team, in your employment, because that way you do reflect your customer community as well. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real merge there going on, no matter what kind of business you're in.
Definitely. So as well as the Culture Economy report, are there any other resources you would recommend the audience checking out to learn more about company culture and how we kind of tackle where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, if you typed in company culture into Google, you'd get a gazillion different records of them. I think that there's a great shout out to the guys here who run our content on our blogs and all the resources. There's a huge amount there. But more than anything else, I would say to people, read widely. There's a whole raft of books out there that are podcasts. If you're not a book listener or a reader, there's a whole series of podcasts out there that are roaming around the whole idea of company culture. So get out there, and no single culture fits any one organization or any one person. So get out there and roam with quite a few. So yeah, we can put together a list of books or a list of podcasts that you can share with the attendees, if that would help. But I think just get out there and start exploring all the resources. Probably never been more than ever available.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And then combining that with those conversations that you're having with your people. Yeah, totally. Making it work for your business, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's really what the culture's got to be, because no two are the same.
Exactly. Perfect. So that's all the questions from me. So I'm just going to open up the Q&A.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions come through. So obviously a lot related to COVID these days in terms of how it's changed the workplace. For a company that's now gone fully remote in its infrastructure, is there any tips or advice you could share about how to change a company culture that is now fully remote?
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge. I can understand why organizations have gone there. I would say look at organizations that have always been fully remote. So number one, recognize the challenge. Look at organizations that have always been fully remote. Often they're in the tech space. Some of the early ones like Skype or other big tech organizations that started fully remote. See what they do. See how they operate. I think there's got to be a temptation that when you go fully remote to think that you need to communicate less. You got to communicate more. You've got to do it in a different way. And I would always say, always pull the team together at some point regularly. There's a company that I've been involved with for quite a few years where we have no offices, but we have people in Sweden, Norway, and London. And we choose a central location and pull them all together, usually once a quarter. And that's such an important thing to do.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a company, I can't think of the name now, but they do annual retreats. And I think the last one pre-pandemic was Disneyland. So that's a nice little trip for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not in the world of tech where there's traditionally been money sloshing around, then the retreats can be something very much smaller than that. But exactly, better to do something that's smaller than to try and wait for another year to do the big one.
That's a good point.
And we heard in the last talk from Lizzie and Amy about implementing a customer experience strategy. What advice would you give a company who are looking to implement a culture strategy? Where would you advise them to start first if you were trying to implement a culture strategy?
It's a little bit of a difficult one. I think mixing those two words, culture and strategy, are both very different things that are joined at the hip. But in many ways, I'm not sure you can be strategic about culture. The word I use is deliberate. Strategic about culture sounds a bit like you're going to force it. And that's probably a wrong way of starting. But to take what I think you are meaning there is, I would say sit down with your people in groups, in individuals, take a pulse, take an understanding, try and work out what those values are, try and start to give some idea as to where the organization is going or where you want it to go, and then start to mold something around what might be a culture.
Excellent. And the final one, has there been any change in culture or the implementation of culture pre-COVID and post-COVID? Obviously now the working space has changed and people's thoughts and feelings from remote working has changed. Have you seen any differences before COVID, or is the advice and the thinking exactly the same?
I think I'd start with, there's never a better time to start than now. Okay, so whether you're pre-COVID, post-COVID, wherever, always start now. Having said that, there's definitely something around when we were all working from home or furloughed. It was easier than it is now. So there's a massive change going on in that when you have to have meetings and everybody's working from home, or you have to bring on a new employee and everybody's working from home, that's actually much easier than where you are now, where some people are at home and some are not. So for instance, we're going through a transition at the moment where we say there are no mixed meetings. Everybody's either all face-to-face or all online. Because the moment you get a meeting of 5 people and 3 are in the room and 2 are in their separate houses, you've got different paces going on, you've got different understandings going on, and it's difficult. So I would say that the hardest part, we're in the hardest part now of actually getting people to understand the new way of working. So yeah, I mean, there is a definite change. I don't think we know what it's like to be deliberately out of choice all working remotely, because we didn't have the choice. We know what it's like to be forced. One day you're all in the office, the next day you're not. And we're learning now what it's like to be in that transition stage.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That just about brings us to the end of our session today. So thank you very much, Jonathan, for taking the time out to join us at our EVEREST Conference 2021. And thank you, of course, to Hannah Churchman as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have been here.